A while ago, I decided to use DoorDash for a late-night meal. It was raining heavily outside, and I didn't want to go out. I ordered some comfort food and waited. The estimated delivery time was around 30 minutes. As I sat in my dimly lit living room, the sound of the rain hitting the windows added to the eerie atmosphere. I was watching TV to pass the time, occasionally checking the app for updates on my order. About 20 minutes in, I received a notification that my food had been picked up. However, the strange part was that the delivery driver's location on the app wasn't moving closer to my house. It was as if they were driving in circles, going nowhere. I felt a sense of unease creeping in. As more time passed, I started to get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. The driver's car icon on the app was moving erratically, sometimes disappearing altogether. It was unnerving. I tried to shake off the unease, thinking it might be a technical glitch, but then my phone rang and I jumped. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. A deep, raspy voice on the other end whispered,
"I'm close, very close."
My heart pounded in my chest. I asked who it was, but there was only silence, followed by heavy breathing. Terrified, I checked the app again, and the driver's location was now just a block away from my house. I could hear a car slowly approaching outside my window. I quickly canceled the order and called the police, explaining the eerie phone call and the driver's strange behavior. The dispatcher assured me they'd send an officer right away. I peeked out my window and saw a car parked down the street, the engine running. There was no sign of the driver. As I waited for the police, fear gnawed at me. After the police arrived, they searched the area and found a note under a nearby rock. It said,
"You're lucky you called the cops."
Reading that note sent a shiver down my spine. It was clear this wasn't a normal situation. The police promised to keep looking into it, but that note only made things more mysterious. Who was this driver, and why did they leave such a scary message? In the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop feeling like someone was watching me. Every car that passed by and every stranger in my neighborhood made me nervous. I was always on edge, worried that the creepy driver might come back. To this day, I still don't know who was behind it all. Back when I worked as a DoorDash driver, I had my fair share of ordinary deliveries. You know, the usual routine of picking up orders and dropping them off. But there was this one time that still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it. It was a cold, rainy night in the middle of winter. I got a notification on my app for a new order. The destination was a small, old house on the outskirts of town. The note from the customer was what struck me as odd. It said,
"Just leave the food on the doorstep. Do not ring the doorbell."
I shrugged it off as a customer's preference and accepted the order. I headed to the restaurant to pick up the food, the smell of warm, delicious meals filling my car. The raindrops splattered against the windshield as I drove to the address. As I got closer to the house, I couldn't help but notice how eerie it looked. The place was in disrepair, with overgrown bushes and a porch light that kept flickering like it was about to give out any moment. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the unease aside. I reached the house and followed the customer's instructions, placing the food on the doorstep as gently as possible. Just as I turned to make my exit, I heard a faint whisper behind me. The voice was barely audible, and I couldn't make out the words, but it sent chills down my spine. I spun around, thinking the customer had come to collect the order, but there was no one there. The porch remained empty, the door firmly shut. I felt a knot in my stomach and decided it was time to leave, not wanting to stick around any longer. As I drove away from that unsettling house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. The entire experience left me with an overwhelming sense of unease. I never received another order for that address, and honestly, I wasn't too eager to. Even now, I can't help but wonder what was really going on in that creepy house on that dark, rainy night. It was a typical Friday evening when I accepted an order that would forever change how I felt about DoorDash. The delivery was scheduled for a small suburban house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The app showed a decent tip, so I thought it'd be a routine drop-off. The address led me to a quaint, well-kept home with a well-lit porch. The note from the customer read,
Please leave the food on the doorstep and ring the doorbell. Do not enter.
Seemed like an easy task, right? I collected the order from the restaurant and made my way to the location. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I approached the house, I noticed all the curtains were drawn, which struck me as unusual. But hey, customers had their quirks, so I brushed it off. I rang the doorbell and waited. A few moments later, the door creaked open just a crack, revealing a pair of cautious eyes. A voice from behind the door said,
Set the food down and back away slowly.
I obliged, placing the bag of food on the doorstep and taking a step back. As I turned to leave, the door suddenly burst open, and I felt a force push me from behind. I stumbled forward, barely catching myself before I fell. A group of people rushed out, clad in dark clothing and masks, all holding cameras. Panic coursed through me as I realized I had walked into some sort of setup. They started laughing and taunting me. One of them, wearing a sinister clown mask, pointed a camera in my face and asked how scared I was. I was furious and scared out of my mind, but I tried to keep my composure. I told them to stop the nonsense and let me go. That's when things took a darker turn. The clown-masked person pulled out a knife, and the laughter turned into menacing whispers. They circled around me, and it was clear they had no intentions of just scaring me anymore. Desperation kicked in, and I made a run for it. I sprinted down the dimly lit street, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear their footsteps behind me, their malicious laughter echoing in the night. Luckily, I managed to reach a well-lit area where a group of people were hanging out. I yelled for help, and the masked figures retreated into the shadows, disappearing into the night. I called the police, and they arrived shortly after. I gave them a description of what had happened, but there was little they could do. The whole ordeal left me shaken and terrified, making me question whether I'd ever want to continue working as a DoorDash driver. From that day on, I approach every delivery with caution, knowing that not every order is what it seems.